April 1943, RAF Duxford, Cambridgeshire, England. In the southwest corner of RAF Duxford's parade ground, nestled among hangars, barracks, and control towers, stood a modest single-story building, Building 10. To the untrained eye, it was unremarkable, a T-shaped structure of red brick and slate, built in 1933, indistinguishable from dozens of other administrative buildings on British airfields. But to the pilots who flew from Duxford during the darkest days of 1940, this building was a sanctuary. It was the sick quarters, the nerve center of medical care for one of Britain's most vital fighter stations. Here, in rooms barely large enough to hold a stretcher, medics patched up shattered bodies, treated stress-induced ulcers, and stabilized men who had fallen from the sky in burning cockpits. Here, the line between life and death was often measured not in hours, but in minutes, and the difference was made by doctors, nurses, clerks, and ambulance drivers who never fired a shot, yet kept the skies over Britain alive with Spitfires and Hurricanes. This is not a story of aerial dogfights or strategic bombing campaigns. It is the story of the human infrastructure that made those victories possible. The medics who ensured that every pilot who could be saved was saved, and every pilot who could fly again did. RAF Duxford was not just any airfield. By 1940, it was a cornerstone of No. 512 Group, Fighter Command, tasked with defending London and the industrial Midlands from Luftwaffe assault. During the Battle of Britain, Duxford's squadrons, most famously No. 19 Squadron, the first to operate the Spitfire, flew relentless sorties against overwhelming odds. Pilots scrambled multiple times a day, often returning with bullet holes in their aircraft, burns on their hands, or shrapnel in their legs. Building 10 was their first stop on the ground. The facility was modest, but meticulously organized. It contained an observation ward for monitoring incoming casualties, a consulting room for triage and diagnosis, a dental surgery critical for pilots whose jaw injuries could impair oxygen mask seals, a dispensary stocked with morphine, sulfa drugs, plasma, and bandages, separate wards for officers and airmen, a reflection of RAF hierarchy, but equally equipped reception and waiting areas where ground crew anxiously awaited news of their pilots. The building had no operating theater for major surgery. Its mandate was stabilization and rapid transfer. For anything beyond minor procedures, bullet extractions, wound debridement, fracture setting, the nearest full-service hospital was Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, 8 miles away. Ambulances waited on standby, engines running during major raids. But for convalescence, recovery from surgery, illness, or exhaustion, the RAF had secured a more peaceful location. Thriplow House, a Victorian manor 2 miles east of Duxford. Requisitioned at the outbreak of war, it became a convalescent annex where pilots could rest, regain strength, and, critically, return to combat. In a war of attrition, pilot retention was as vital as aircraft production. Every flyer saved was a victory. Among the first doctors to serve in Building 10 was squadron leader Dr. John Apley, a young London physician who had joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve in 1939. Trained at University College Hospital and working as a GP in Pinner, Apley was posted to Duxford in the spring of 1940, just as the Dunkirk evacuation began and the Luftwaffe turned its full fury on Britain. Apley's days were a blur of emergencies. He treated pilots with burns from cockpit fires, lacerations from shattered canopies, concussions from violent landings, and gunshot wounds from strafing runs. But what struck him most was not the physical trauma. But the psychological toll. During the Battle of Britain, Duxford's pilots flew 4 to 6 sorties a day. Sleep was scarce. Rations were thin. The constant threat of death, on the ground from bombs, in the air from Messerschmitts, created a pressure cooker of stress. Apley began noticing a pattern. Peptic ulcers were rampant among fighter pilots, far beyond normal rates. At the time, ulcers were poorly understood. Many attributed them to diet or heredity. But Apley suspected combat stress was the true culprit. He documented cases meticulously, noting that pilots with the highest sortie counts also had the most severe gastrointestinal symptoms. His observations were among the earliest clinical recognitions of what would later be termed combat fatigue, a precursor to modern understanding of PTSD. Apley's work at Duxford lasted just over a year, but it shaped his entire career. After the war, he became a pioneering pediatrician, applying the same empathetic observational approach to child health. In 1968, during the Tet Offensive, he led the British pediatric team in Saigon, continuing to run his hospital even after it was overrun by North Vietnamese forces. For his courage and compassion, he was awarded the CBE. But it was in the quiet rooms of Building 10, listening to young pilots describe nightmares between morphine doses, that Apley first learned a truth he would carry for life. The deepest wounds are often the ones you cannot see. Not all heroes at Duxford wore white coats. Leading aircraft woman Doris Hudson joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAF, in 1942 and was posted to Duxford that August as an administrative clerk in the sick quarters. Her role was unglamorous but essential. She typed medical reports, managed patient records, ordered supplies, and even distributed contraceptives, a discreet but vital service for the young men and women living in close quarters under extreme stress. By the time Hudson arrived, Duxford was no longer a frontline fighter base. The Battle of Britain was over. The Blitz had ended, but danger remained. Flying accidents were common. Engine failures, landing gear collapses, mid-air collisions during training. Hudson recalled ambulances racing out to crash sites, sometimes returning with bodies, sometimes with men who would walk again in weeks. In April 1943, Duxford was transferred to the U.S. Army Air Forces as home to the 78th Fighter Group. Hudson was among the British staff who stayed behind to ensure a smooth handover, a quiet act of professionalism that bridged two nations at war. She later moved to RAF Newmarket, but her time at Building 10 left a lasting impression. War is not just fought in the air or on the ground. It is sustained by the people who keep the machinery of survival running. The American arrival, Friplow House becomes a hospital. When the 78th Fighter Group, nearly 1,700 personnel, arrived at Duxford in April 1943, the medical demands exploded. The Americans flew P-47 Thunderbolts and later P-51 Mustangs on long-range escort missions over Europe. Their losses were staggering, over 300 pilots killed or missing by war's end. Building 10, designed for a few hundred RAF personnel, was overwhelmed. The solution was to upgrade Friplow House from a convalescent home to Duxford's primary medical facility. The Victorian Manor's grand rooms were converted into wards, operating theaters, and recovery suites. American medics moved in, bringing with them penicillin, still scarce in Britain, plasma transfusion kits, and mobile X-ray units. It was here that Captain Montemore Doc Monty Schwader of San Francisco established his practice. A flight surgeon for the 83rd Fighter Squadron, Schwader was responsible for the health of over 300 men. His days began before dawn, checking pilots for signs of fatigue, illness, or injury. After missions, he met returning aircraft on the tarmac, ready to treat burns, fractures, or shock. Schwader's most harrowing moment came in September 1944. A Canadian Halifax bomber, crippled by flak, attempted an emergency landing at Duxford. Schwader raced to the field in an ambulance, but as the bomber skidded off the runway, its bombs detonated. The shockwave threw Schwader to the ground, killing others nearby. He survived, but the incident underscored the ever-present danger, even for those sworn to heal. Yet, Schwader was more than a medic. He was the founder of the Thunderbolts, Duxford swing band in which he played bass saxophone. On Saturday nights, the Manor's ballroom echoed with jazz, laughter, and the clinking of mugs, a brief respite from the war, for pilots facing another mission over Germany. That music was as vital as morphine. While Schwader treated the wounded, Staff Sergeant Cecil K. Whitehead of Shannon, Mississippi, ensured they got there. As an ambulance driver for the 78th Fighter Group, Whitehead's job was simple but brutal: get the injured from Duxford to Thriplow House as fast as possible. His ambulance, a modified GMC truck with canvas sides and a stretcher rack, was a familiar sight on the B-1368 road during major operations. He waited on the airfield perimeter, engine idling, as fighters returned. If a pilot was too injured to climb from his cockpit, Whitehead would lift him out, wrap him in blankets, and race to Thriplow. Whitehead's logbooks showed dozens of runs per week, not just for combat wounds, but for appendicitis, pneumonia, and the ever-present threat of flying fatigue. He never spoke of heroism. In his view, he was just doing his job. But to the pilots he carried, he was a lifeline. The work at Duxford's sick quarters and Thriplow House was more than humanitarian, it was strategic. In a war where pilot training took 18 months and aircraft production was measured in thousands, keeping experienced flyers alive was a force multiplier. RAF medical protocols at Duxford reduced pilot mortality by ensuring rapid evacuation and expert care. American innovations like penicillin and plasma cut infection rates and recovery times. Convalescent care at Thriplow meant pilots returned to combat faster, some within weeks of serious injury. This system was replicated across Britain and Europe. By 1944, Allied air forces had a medical infrastructure as sophisticated as their bombing campaigns, ensuring that the men who won air superiority were not just brave, but supported, healed, and sustained. Today, Building 10 still stands at IWM Duxford, a silent witness to the courage of those who healed as others fought. Thriplow House has returned to private life, but its wartime role is remembered in archives, letters, and oral histories. If this story of quiet courage, medical innovation, and human resilience resonates with you, if you believe the men and women who kept the skies alive deserve more than a footnote, we invite you to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to preserving the real legacy of World War II, not as spectacle, but as testament, because victory was not won by pilots alone. It was won by the medics who kept them flying.